I didn't realize how little I trusted myself until I noticed how often I needed reassurance from everyone else. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about validation, not in a dramatic way, not in a please like me kind of way, but in their quieter ways it shows up. The explaining, the over explaining, the feeling that I need to make sure everyone understands why I did something, why I'm late, why I changed my mind, why I feel tired, why I need space. And I realized recently I spent years explaining myself, and I always thought I was trying to avoid being misunderstood. But I think, deeper down, I didn't fully trust myself unless I could justify myself first. And I started wondering how many women live this way without even realizing it. How many of us became so focused on managing perception that we slowly stopped listening to ourselves. I remember noticing this in myself years ago when I would make even really small decisions and immediately start looking outside myself for reassurance. Not because I truly wanted someone else to decide for me, but because I had this underlying feeling that my own instincts probably weren't trustworthy enough on their own. I would ask people what they thought about things I already knew I felt uncomfortable about. And if their answer conflicted with mine, I usually assumed they were probably right and I was probably wrong. Looking back now, I can see how disconnected I had become from trusting my own internal response. I think a lot of women over-explain for reasons that make complete sense. Sometimes we learned early that misunderstandings felt emotionally unsafe. Sometimes we learned to smooth things over before conflict could even happen. Sometimes we became the caretaker, the peacemaker, the one who anticipated everyone else's reaction before our own. And over time, explaining yourself can become almost automatic. You walk in somewhere, and instead of simply saying, "I'm sorry, I'm late," you feel this urge to keep going. There was traffic, and then this happened, and I couldn't find parking, and I left earlier than I normally do. Not because you're dishonest, not because you're manipulative, but because part of you feels responsible for making sure everyone sees you correctly. And that's exhausting. I notice this in ordinary situations too, like bringing food to a gathering. If somebody said they didn't like something I made, I would immediately start explaining why I made it that way. "Oh, well, I use this ingredient because," or "I was trying something different," or "I didn't want it to be too spicy." And afterward, I realized nobody had actually asked for an explanation. They simply didn't prefer the dish. And part of me felt uncomfortable just letting their opinion exist without trying to manage how they saw me. Like if they didn't like the food, maybe they wouldn't like me. And that sounds small, but I think these little moments reveal a lot. I think many women became so accustomed to managing other people's comfort that silence itself feels uncomfortable. Because once you stop explaining, there's space, and space can feel vulnerable. You apologize, then there's silence. And suddenly, part of you wants to rush in and feel it. But sometimes, you've already said enough. Sometimes I'm sorry I'm late is enough. Sometimes no, I can't do that is enough. Sometimes I'm tired is enough. And I know that sounds simple, but for people who are used to explaining themselves constantly, that can actually feel incredibly difficult. The other day, I noticed this in a conversation with someone I know. She's very expressive and very talkative, and normally I probably would have matched that energy automatically. But that day, I just didn't have much to say. She asked me something. I answered briefly. Then she kept asking if I was okay. And I remember noticing this urge in myself to start explaining, to soften it, to reassure her, to give a long emotional explanation for why I was quiet. But instead, I just said, I'm okay. I just don't feel like talking very much. And that was hard for me in a strange way. Not because I was being dishonest, but because I realized how accustomed I was to explaining myself in order to make other people comfortable. And for once, I let my answer be enough. I think self-trust often erodes very quietly. Not through one huge moment, but through years of dismissing yourselves in tiny ways. Ignoring exhaustion, ignoring resentment, ignoring discomfort, ignoring intuition, ignoring what your body is trying to tell you. And eventually, you can come disconnected from yourself without realizing it. You start looking outside yourself for reassurance before making decisions. You second guess your instincts. You feel guilty for having needs. You explain your boundaries before you're even fully spoken them. And somewhere along the way, your own inner voice stops feeling trustworthy. I think one of the ways this showed up most strongly for me was constantly checking other people's reaction before trusting my own. If I felt uncomfortable around someone, but everyone else seemed fine with them, I would assume I was being too sensitive. If I felt exhausted, I would convince myself I was just lazy. If something didn't feel aligned for me, I would often stay in it anyway because I thought maybe discomfort wasn't valid enough. And over time, that really disconnects you from yourself. Because eventually you stop asking, what do I actually feel? And start asking, what would make the most sense to everyone else? But I don't think rebuilding trust usually happens all at once. I think it starts very quietly. Sometimes rebuilding self-trust looks like allowing yourself to pause before answering, listening to your exhaustion instead of pushing through it, noticing resentment instead of judging yourself for having it, letting discomfort mean something, realizing you don't owe everyone a detailed explanation, taking a breath before automatically saying yes, asking yourself, what do I actually feel right now? And maybe that's where trust begins. Not in becoming fearless, not in becoming perfectly confident, but in slowly learning to listen to yourself again. And honestly, rebuilding trust has looked very small for me sometimes. It's looked like pausing before immediately asking someone else what they think, sitting with my own feelings first, letting myself dislike something without needing to justify why, letting I'm tired be enough sometimes, letting I don't want to be enough sometimes. And even now, I still notice the urge to explain myself sometimes. But now I recognize it faster. And I think awareness changes things slowly. I think many women spent years becoming incredibly skilled at understanding everyone else. But sometimes we lose ourselves in that process. And maybe rebuilding self-trust isn't about becoming a completely different person. Maybe it's about returning to yourself slowly. Maybe it's about realizing you don't have to explain your existence quite so much anymore. And maybe one of the smallest but most powerful things we can do is to begin listening to ourselves again.